Welcome to the Parent Compass on SmartSocial podcast, where we explore parenting themes to help our kids navigate the tween and teen years in our competitive and uncertain worlds. We are your hosts, Cindy Muchnick and Jenn Curtis. Today, we are thrilled to host a fellow mother, author, psychotherapist, and card-holding human, Lori Gottlieb.
Lori Gottlieb is a psychotherapist and the author of the New York Times bestseller, Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. Maybe you have all heard of it. We all have. Which is being adapted as a television series. In addition to her clinical practice, she writes the Atlantic Weekly's Dear Therapist advice column and contributes regularly to the New York Times and many other publications. Her recent TED Talk is one of the top 10 most watched of the year, and she has a phenomenal new podcast which she co-hosts on iHeartRadio called Dear Therapists, produced by Katie Couric. Lori, thank you so much for being here with us today for a short conversation.
It's my pleasure.
So maybe we'll jump right in. Really, we're going to focus our talk on parenting teens and the teen and tween experience. And what really jumped out to us right away was a letter that someone wrote to Dear Therapist called "My Mom Won't Stop Pressuring Me to Get Better Grades." And in that letter, you really go into the pain. Well, the writer goes into her pain of feeling pressured by her mother about her body image, but also about getting good grades in school and expectations of parents. And I thought maybe you could share with us a little bit about the advice that you gave to this struggling teen and tween and how our parent listeners could learn from some of that advice.
Yeah, I was really glad to hear from someone that age. I get a lot of letters, both to the column and the podcast, from teenagers. And I think it's because they know what they want, but they don't know how to communicate that to the adults in their lives. And they get a lot of pushback when they do. The adults have this perspective of, I'm telling you this for your own good, or I'm really, this is why I'm pressuring you in this way. Or they don't even call it pressure, which is sort of gaslighting the kid because the kid feels so much pressure. And in this case, the mom was giving her all of these mixed messages like, well, you need to get better grades. And then, if she was staying home and studying, she'd say, oh, but you know what? You need to watch your weight. And, you need to get outside and exercise. So she couldn't win, whatever this girl did. And I think the mother was coming from a place of love. And I know it's hard to see her that way because when you read the letter, the mother sounds like she's very misattuned to her child and doesn't really have her child's best interest in mind. But I think that the reason parents do this, and I think we all, on some level fall into this trap of, I want to make sure that my kid is doing what my kid needs to do to succeed in the world. And whether that's looking a certain way so that they will be received a certain way socially, or whether that's getting certain grades so that they can get into whatever college you think is going to change their life, which by the way, it won't. That's where it comes from. So when I'm writing this letter, I'm writing back to the girl, but I'm writing in a way that I think her mother will be able to hear her. I'm trying to give her the language so that her mother can actually hear her when she goes to her, because whatever they've been saying to each other hasn't been working.
Yeah.
Well, to switch the tables on that a little bit, one of the things that you do so beautifully in your book, in your podcast, in all that you do, is to focus on the power of human connection and how that can be healing. Sometimes we, in what we do in our lines of work, hear from parents who have a difficult time. They want to connect to their kids, to their teens, but they have a difficult time doing that. What do you say to the parent who wants to be able to have a deeper relationship with their teen, but just can't find the way to connect with them?
I think two things. One, they need to separate out what they're wanting from what their teen is wanting and really listen to who their teen is. So I think when kids are younger, they seem a little bit more malleable. And there's this fantasy, and I say fantasy because it's not real, that somehow you're going to mold your kid in a certain way. And our kids come out being the people that they are. And so we can influence them in certain ways by exposing them to things and seeing what they gravitate toward. But I think that when we try to create kind of person, then we're not doing the job of parenting. And I say this, most people listening to this will probably say, I'm not like that at all. Who are those people who do that? But I think there are these really subtle ways in which we all fall into that trap. And I think the second thing is, in terms of communicating better with your kid, is learning how to listen. A lot of us don't know how to listen. We think we're listening, but we're doing a lot of talking.
I think in your field, Lori, professionally, as both a parent of a 15-year-old, but also as a therapist, not only have you become fine-tuned and an expert in the listening side of things, but also you have, a perspective that allows you a great deal of ability to improvise. For example, I was watching your kickoff podcast last night on how your podcast is made and what your first season was like. And you and your partner, Guy, who both do this podcast, were talking about the fact that you don't prepare anything for the questions you receive. You don't talk about it beforehand. You don't decide what your answers are going to be. You go from your instinct and your gut and your training. But I wish every parent could have that wonderful ability and that training to do some improvisation and be able to handle these things that get thrown at them, at a pretty rapid speed sometimes. And I think that we can learn a lot from you and some of the skills that you have on how to almost apply that to our lives, not becoming our kids' therapists, but becoming better listeners and more engaged in a deeper level.
I think what you're talking about is presence. And I think that's what our kids really want. They want us to be present. They want to feel understood. They want to feel safe bringing something up with you. And so presence is about sitting in that space with them. And what happens is the minute our kids say something, especially if it's something we didn't expect or something that concerns us or something where we feel like, ooh, I wouldn't have done it that way, or I have a really good idea for them about what they can do about this. Our first instinct is to offer that to them. And so that's not what good listening is. And that's not what presence is. Presence is this person is coming to you. They're telling you something. And I always say there are 3 words you can say to your kids, which is tell me more, or just 2 words, say more, right? And you would be surprised because they know so much. Our kids are so intelligent, and I mean emotionally intelligent too, that maybe, yes, they have some learning to do, of course, but if you give them that space and you give them the presence and they can really just talk through something, they will hear themselves think. They will come up with something, and you can chime in, a question, not you should do this, but sort of helping them anticipate the consequences of what they're coming up with. So, saying something like, so, and then what do you think will happen? Or tell me what you think will happen if you do that. Or what is your goal in doing that? What is your hope in doing that?
So Lori, you've just given us, our first and maybe best, therapist hat kind of lesson. And we talk in the Parent Compass, our book, also about listening and asking good questions. I know you just did a wonderful podcast with our common friend, Kelly Corrigan, who has taught us also that same term that we try to, apply. And that is strange how simple those words are and sometimes how hard they are to just say. And if we can get those to be habitual, and instead of jumping into fix or jumping into suggest, Kelly talked to us about how that's robbing our kids of the ability to solve their own problems, or sometimes they don't want things fixed. They just want to have you listen.
One of the things I say to parents all the time is when your kid comes to you with something and it seems very loaded, you can say to them right away, how can I help you right now? Do you just want to vent? Do you want a hug? Do you want me to brainstorm solutions with you? And again, that's not giving you solutions, it's brainstorming. Do you want me to sort of brainstorm with you? What do you want right now? And sometimes they will, no one's ever asked them that. And they're so moved by that. In that moment, it just calms them down right away because they go into the conversation thinking, I'm so riled up right now. I don't even know what to do with all these big feelings right now. And if someone can just slow them down and say, what would be helpful right now? They might just say, I just want you to hear this. Okay, then you know what your job is. The pressure is off. I just want you to hear it. And you listen and you empathize. And by the way, empathizing with them doesn't mean that you have the same perspective they do. So they're like, here's what this teacher did, or here's what my friend did, or here's this situation. And you're thinking all kinds of things. All you need to do is understand why they feel that way, why they see it that way. Oh, I understand. Oh, yeah, that must have been hard. Oh, yeah, tell me more about that. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry, right? That goes a lot. That just calms them down. And that gets them into a place where the thinking part of their brain, the frontal lobe then, can get engaged. But right now they're in that very, that very primitive part of the brain where it's all emotion. And sometimes they will be able to say to you, I just want to vent right now. And then later I want to talk about maybe what I can do about this. Because it doesn't have to all happen in one conversation.
I love how even as you say that, your voice is matching your demeanor. And I think we have a lot to learn about that as parents too, that we can calm them down by our words, and also just kind of by showing them a calmer demeanor and helping them calm down even in that way.
There's something so contagious about anxiety. It's so incredibly contagious in a household. If somebody in a household is really anxious or stressed, other people are going to feel it too. And so when your kid comes to you and they're really anxious or stressed, if you can really stay in that place of calmness, not get, their anxiety, not catch it from them, it's really easy to catch their anxiety. And vice versa, by the way. If you're the one who's really anxious and you come to them about something, they're going to hear you so differently if you can come to them in a really calm way. I was just going to say one thing. Most of all, they don't want to feel criticized or blamed. So there's a difference between holding them responsible for something and blaming them for something. So if you can come to them and say, hey, here's what happened. This is your responsibility. Or here's something that you need to fix. Here's something you need to repair. That's different from blaming them, shaming them, criticizing them. It's just the facts, ma'am.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I notice it in the mornings when I'm the one with, my kids are younger. And so we gotta get going, and they're walking around, and then all of a sudden they're not fine anymore because I'm not fine. Plus I need to work on that.
I remember
that's right.
Jen and I have different aged kids. Mine go from 22 to 14, and Jen's are younger. And I do remember those days, Jen, of once they were buckled in the car seat, just once they were buckled in, I could run back into the house and get a few, sort of everyone was in one place. So those are tricky times.
But that really does set the tone for the day. So if everybody is really stressed out, then that's how they're going off to school. That's how you're going off to work. And so, it's really about creating a routine in a moment of calmness of, here's what we do, here's when things need to get done by, and having consequences already lined up. Like, if you don't do this by this time, here's what the consequence is going to be. And so you're not doling it out in that moment when everyone's stressed and they need to get out the door. They already know what it's going to be. And then also leaving room for life to happen. Like, something happens, someone ran out of toothpaste, or, they can't find something. Okay, they have to learn the night before. You've got to pack it up and do your checklist and make sure everything's there. So they're learning from that experience too.
Lori, I want to switch the moment to maybe having you put your parent hat on. On page 368 in your wonderful book, Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, you say in it, I try to imagine Zach, that's your son, as a teenager. I remember my mom dealing with me as a teenager and finding me as alien as I might one day find Zach. And now that you are a parent of a teenager, might you share an observation or an anecdote about your own teen parenting advice that you could give our listeners, or about, your involvement in raising teens now that you've reached that stage and can, maybe reflect back and apologize to your mom in some ways, or whatever that
Well, I think in a lot of ways that, I'm really lucky because I have a kid who's incredibly easy in a lot of ways. But I think the usual teen things are there that, everybody talks about. Like, he used to tell me so much, and now if I ask him a question, I get sort of a monosyllabic answer, and I don't really know what's going on in his life as much. I think with COVID and remote learning, I'm hearing a lot that I normally would not have been privy to. And I think that that's brought us closer. But I think that one of the things that's really nice about teenagers is that they're in that liminal period between childhood and adulthood. And so you start to see more kind of complex thinking. You start to share more interests with them, I think, in terms of just like being able to talk about what's going on in the world, or movies or books or whatever it might be. And so finding ways to connect with your teens doesn't have to be the ways that you connected with them as children, but it could be anything from, you have rituals, right? You still have your movie night, and now the movies are a little more sophisticated, or you still talk about books, or you still, we still do our rosebud and thorn, which is, sort of like, what was the best part of your day, what was the worst part of your day, and what was something new, the bud. And that doesn't get old. I mean, they may roll their eyes, but they still like doing that. or it changes to like a would you rather, and you make up all these silly scenarios. So I think realizing that they still are kids in some way, even though my son is way taller than me and looks like a little man, they're still kids in a lot of ways. And so not to lose the childlike sense of wonder and fun that you shared with your kid, just adapting it for what's developmentally appropriate for their age and stage.
It's like you hit the nail on the head for me, because just today I have a 22-year-old who is living in Boston. He just graduated college and he is a new school teacher. He teaches 8th and 10th grade English.
Wow.
And he's this, kind of sophisticated thinker and very cerebral and three-dimensional and always loved learning. And it seemed almost natural that he would go into teaching. But I just also shipped him his holiday gift, which is this enormous Lego set of the Roman Colosseum. And at 22, he was as excited to get a Lego set. He'll probably be embarrassed if he ever hears this, but he was excited to get a Lego set at 22 as he was at age 6. And I turned to my husband and I said, do you remember the thousands of hours, these kids spent doing it? And I think it is important with that, to keep that childlike, those connections and those memories, and to be able to still celebrate that, because I do think even as adults, we crave, those times and those memories.
Right. And I was just going to say, I think that teens have a lot of pressure to grow up quickly, that their peers, there's this idea that they need to be sophisticated, they need to be cool, and they can't act like kids anymore, but they are. And I think we all have that childlike place inside of ourselves that we want to keep alive. And so, I think that home is the place where they can let it all hang out, where they can be who they want to be, where they're not so worried about their friends. And I think also just, making sure that you're talking to them about what they're seeing on social media, because again, they get these ideas about how they're supposed to be and what's okay and what's not okay in terms of their likes, their dislikes, and what they want to do with their time.
So Lori,
Great, so much. Yes, thank you so much for your time. We have one more question.
One last question, because I did want to comment on your Dear Therapist episode. If you just had a couple minutes just to tell us about Libby's self-induced stress. It was an episode where you interviewed a teenager, and it's gotten a lot of listens and a lot of hits. And we recommend all our listeners go over to Dear Therapists and find this Libby's self-induced stress. And could you just take a minute to maybe summarize or two how that came to be and what some of the feedback and results were of that?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. So we do this podcast, Dear Therapists, and it's like you get to hear the equivalent of a therapy session, although of course it's not a therapy session, but it sounds like what we would do in the therapy room with somebody. So someone writes in a letter and we spend 50 minutes with them as we would as therapists. They get 2 therapists for the price of 1 here. And then we give them a homework assignment that they have a week to do. And then they report back and let us know how the advice went, whether it worked, whether it didn't. And this girl in high school wrote into us and she said, I feel so much pressure to build a resume for college and I don't have any time for myself. And she's a really good student. And she's just experiencing so much anxiety and so much stress. And so we talked to her for, the way we would as therapists. And we really got to this place with her where she was able to broaden her perspective. And we gave her this homework assignment. I don't want to spoil what it is, but she does it and it changed her life. And so many people have said that not only was it great to hear how it helped a 16-year-old, and so many schools, by the way, across the country now are playing this. They're sending it out for all of their high schoolers to listen to. And I think middle schoolers should listen to it also. But parents are saying, I use the advice in my own life. Teachers are listening to this, faculty are listening to this, administrators are listening to this. Anyone who works with kids should really listen to this because you can hear, it's one thing in the column where you got to see this girl write in, and I think it's a really useful column for people to read. But I think hearing the girl struggle with this, hearing her sort of intellectually understand what we're saying, but really saying, yeah, but the reality is to get into college, I need to do this and I need to be the head of this club. And when somebody gets that, I get so envious and all of the things. And to hear her kind of grapple with that ambivalence and grapple with the external pressure and the internal place of knowing of what she needs to be a full human and to really succeed in life. And we're not saying to her, and I think the lesson isn't, and I think that why people are concerned about bringing this up is they feel like, well, people are going to tell me like, I'm not supposed to do all these things, and then I'm not going to get into the college that I want to get into. And so we talk a little bit about what the meaning of getting into a college and what college is really for. But we also are saying, that's great if you want to go to, a very elite college, that's great. But we're not saying go from 100% to 0%. We're saying there's like an 80% on the things that don't matter as much to you, and go 110% on the things that do. And, and I think that she ends up doing our homework assignment and coming back, and she is just, you can hear her voice. She is just like, we get to see her, but you only get to hear her. And I think any teenager would benefit so much, and their parents and teachers, from hearing that one episode. It's the Dear Therapist podcast, and the episode is called Libby's Self-Induced Stress.
Lori, where can our listeners find you?
They can find me at my website, which is lorigottlieb.com. They can find me on Instagram at Lori Gottlieb _author. They can find me on Twitter. They can find me on Facebook. They can listen to my TED Talk, which is at TED.com. They can go to The Atlantic and find my Dear Therapist column. They can go to wherever they listen to podcasts and wherever they get their podcasts and listen to the Dear Therapist podcast. And they can read my book, Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, wherever they buy their books.
Lori, you've cloned yourself into every single social media platform, and we can find you everywhere, which is so wonderful. Your advice and your down-to-earth approach and just your real tangible steps that we can take to improve as parents of teens and as individuals in our own bodies. We are so grateful for the time you spent with us. And everybody, please go out and listen to Lori's podcast, Dear Therapist, and pick up a copy of Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. If you don't, then you're really not in the club. So please join. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you,
Take care.
Lori.